The first time Margaret saw the dialysis machine connected to her son, she thought of a second heart, foreign, mechanical, transparent, yet pumping life through him as faithfully as the one buried in his chest. Tubes coiled like crimson rivers from Ethan's arm to the clear cartridge that whirred and sighed, filtering, cleansing, doing the work his body refused. She sat rigid in the chair, watching the gentle sway of his chest against the ventilator's rhythm. The room was cold, too white, too bright, yet Margaret couldn't take her eyes off the plastic lines carrying his blood outside of him, as if his life had been turned inside out. Dr. Singh stood beside her, voice calm, measured. "This is continuous renal replacement therapy, CRRT. It will act as his kidneys until we know whether they'll recover. For now, it will run 24 hours a day." Margaret nodded, words locked in her throat. "He won't feel pain from this," Singh added gently. "The sedation will keep him comfortable." But Margaret still saw the betrayal in his body, the way his skin seemed to pale, his face to slack, as though the boy she had raised had receded into the machines, leaving only this fragile vessel behind. She reached for his hand, cool against hers, and whispered, "I'll sit through every hour of this, Ethan. Everyone." Days blurred into a cycle of drips, beeps, and numbers scrawled across charts. Margaret lost count of the cups of lukewarm coffee she abandoned half-finished, of the prayers she whispered into the sterile air, of the times she pressed her forehead to the bedrail and begged silently for the smallest flicker of his will to return. Josh came often, always looking guilty, always hovering, as if afraid Margaret might send him away. He brought snacks she rarely touched and stories Ethan could not hear, how Kyle's arm was in a cast, how Brandon kept insisting he hadn't been filming at the moment of the crash, though everyone knew he had. "You should rest," Josh told her one afternoon, watching her from the doorway. "He'll rest when he does," she replied. "I's never leaving Ethan." Josh nodded, swallowing whatever apology still haunted his tongue. As the days stretched, Ethan's sedation was lightened in cautious increments. There were moments when his eyelids trembled, moments when his hand twitched faintly under hers, moments when she swore she saw a flicker of recognition. But they were fleeting, swallowed quickly by the weight of exhaustion and the steady hum of dialysis. Margaret talked to him anyway. About nothing. About everything. About the time he learned to ride a bike and refused training wheels because real superheroes don't need them. About the scar on his eyebrow from when he'd tripped on the curb running home after dark. About how proud she had been when he got his first job bagging groceries at 16, even if he had hated every second. "You think I wasn't watching, Ethan," she murmured one night, tracing the edge of his palm. "But I saw everything. Every moment you were strong. Every moment you were afraid. Every moment you were more than you believed." Her voice cracked. She swallowed hard and added, "I just didn't say it enough. Maybe I thought you already knew." The machines answered with their impartial music, never rushing, never slowing. The nurses became her companions in this strange, suspended world. Leela with her gentle reminders to eat. Jonah, the night nurse, who told her stories about his grandmother's stubbornness to distract her from staring too long at the monitor. Even Dr. Carter, who appeared each morning like clockwork, reviewing charts, adjusting orders, offering her steady reassurances without ever promising more than he could give. "His vitals are improving," Carter told her on the fourth day. "That's good. His kidneys," though he paused, searching for the right weight of truth. "They're still silent." Margaret clenched Ethan's hand tighter. "Then it'll be their voice until they wake up." Carter's eyes softened. "That's exactly what he needs." By the end of the first week, the IQ had become a second home. Its fluorescent lights her son, its alarms her clock. Margaret's world shrank to the chair, the bed, the hand in hers, and the machine that whispered life back into him. She no longer flinched at the sight of blood in the lines. She no longer noticed the sting of antiseptic that clung to her clothes. What she noticed instead were the small signs, his fingers curling slightly around hers when the sedation lifted the faint furrow of his brow as though he were chasing some dream he couldn't quite catch. Once, in the middle of the night, she heard him murmur, just a sound, barely a syllable, but she caught it all the same. It was her name. Not Mum, not Mother, not even Ma, the grudging syllable he had used in recent years. Just a soft, broken Margaret, as though reaching for her in the dark. She wept quietly into his hand. Claire visited on the weekend, bustling in with homemade soup and a firm hand on Margaret's shoulder. "You need to sleep in a real bed," she said. "This is my bed," Margaret replied simply. Claire sighed, kissed her sister's temple, and sat with Ethan while Margaret washed her face in the sterile bathroom down the hall. When she returned, Claire was humming softly, stroking Ethan's hair as if he were her own. Margaret felt both relief and a jealous ache. "He looks peaceful," Claire said. "He looks too still," Margaret whispered. But she sat again, reclaiming her place by his side. Dialysis was relentless. The nurses explained the process in simple terms: blood drawn out, filtered, returned clean. Margaret began to think of it like a conversation between the machine and her son, a dialogue of flow and pressure, toxins removed, balance restored. But it was also a reminder. Every drop of blood outside his body told her what was failing inside him. Each tube was both salvation and accusation. His kidneys, once unnoticed, had betrayed him. Or perhaps, she thought bitterly, it was life that had betrayed them both. She caught herself sometimes staring at her own body, her own sides, as if testing whether her kidneys were sturdy enough, worthy enough, to be divided. The thought had already taken root. It would not leave. On the 10th day, Dr. Singh delivered the news gently but firmly. "There's still no improvement," she said, eyes steady. "Well, continue dialysis, of course. But if this persists, we'll need to consider the possibility of permanent damage." Margaret nodded, her jaw tight. "And then, Singh said softly, we would discuss long-term options. Ongoing dialysis or transplant." The word hung in the air, heavy, inevitable. Margaret's heart didn't falter. She had already made her choice days ago. She pressed Ethan's hand to her cheek and whispered, "You're not alone in this fight. If you need a piece of me, you'll have it." And though the machines carried on, indifferent, she could have sworn his fingers twitched again, faintly, as if to answer Dot by the time the calendar in the IQ lounge flipped itself forward with a tired sigh. Ethan had been on continuous dialysis for nearly 2 weeks. The days were measured less by dates and more by lab slips, creatinine that climbed whenever the machine paused, potassium that floated with danger until the filters coaxed it back, liters of fluid taken off and tallied like debts repaid. He was off the ventilator now, tube removed, oxygen by cannula tracing tender lines along his cheeks, and he drifted in and out, waking to a world that clicked and hummed and spoke in acronyms. Margaret had learned to sleep in increments that matched the ICU's rhythms, 20 minutes here, an hour there, eyes snapping open at a change in the monitor's tone, the way a mother's body learns to wake at a baby's cry. She had also learned the shape of the new whirring, a dull, constant pressure under her ribs that did not announce itself with drama, only with the fact that it never, ever left. On a grey morning that refused to commit to rain, Dr. Singh appeared at the glass with a folder tucked beneath her arm. She entered with her usual quiet and paused 1 heartbeat longer than usual before she began. Margaret heard the pause as if it were a sound. "Good morning, Doctor," Singh said, nodding to Ethan, who was propped at 30 degrees, eyes half closed but tracking. "How's your pain?" "Like the gym fought me," Ethan rasped, the first humor in his voice since the crash. His throat was still hoarse, words thin and furry at the edges. He tried a smile. It held for a second, then slipped. Dr. Singh smiled back and turned to the monitors, to the dialysis settings, to the numbers that had become their uncomfortable acquaintances. When she finally faced Margaret again, her expression had shifted to that particular professional kindness that always made Margaret brace. "We've watched and waited," Dr. Singh said. "We've given your kidneys," she glanced at Ethan, "every chance to wake up. We've adjusted fluids, protected your blood pressure, avoided nephrotoxins. We tapered the CRT yesterday for a few hours to see if we'd get any urine response. We did not." She exhaled gently. "At this point, with persistent anuria and your lab trends, we need to prepare for the possibility that your kidneys may not recover." The sentence landed and did not break anything, it simply rearranged what had already been cracked. "What does prepare mean?" Margaret asked. She didn't recognize her own voice level, almost calm, as if the body had decided that tremors wasted energy. "It means we transition from continuous dialysis to intermittent hemodialysis once Hayes stable enough," Dr. Singh said. "We place a tunneled catheter for more reliable access. It means we start talking about long-term options, ongoing dialysis several times a week." She waited, then added, "deliberate, or transplant." Ethan's eyes drifted from the ceiling to Dr. Singh as the word slid into the room. He blinked once, twice, as if the syllables were dust in his lashes. "Transplant," he repeated, and the second time the word sounded like something he'd found in a stranger's mouth. Margaret's hand, already on his forearm, tightened. She didn't look at him, she looked at Dr. Singh, because looking at the doctor meant the world stayed in medical grammar and not in the wild language of fear. "What happens to start that conversation?" "We begin an evaluation," Dr. Singh said. "2 tracks. One for Ethan, blood type, antibody screen, infectious disease testing, overall surgical risk, and one for any potential living donors." Her glance slid, not unkindly, to Margaret. "Blood type, tissue typing, cross-match, imaging of the kidneys, cardiac clearance. There's also an independent donor advocate who ensures any donor isn't being pressured and understands the risks." "Risks," Ethan echoed, like a person translating the terms of his own life. "For donors," Dr. Singh said, "nephrectomy is major surgery. There are operative risks: bleeding, infection, complications from anesthesia. Long-term, most donors live healthy lives with one kidney, but there's a small increase in risk for high blood pressure and chronic kidney disease over decades. We screen very carefully to minimize that." Ethan's head turned toward his mother slowly, like a door on old hinges. His eyes, cleared of sedatives, were all Ethan, stubborn and scared and trying to be too brave. "No," he said, immediately, reflexively, "no. I want Ethan," Margaret said, and her voice was the softest thing in the room. "Listen, I won't let you do that," he said, louder now, the old volume coming back in patches. "Mum, no. I already—" He stopped, swallowed, eyes bright. "I already did this. The car. He shut his eyes against the images. "I won't take more. Not from you, Doctor." Singh stepped back a half step, opening the space so that mother and son could feel it. "The evaluation takes time," she said. "Nothing is decided today. We'll continue dialysis. We'll see if your kidneys surprise us. Medicine loves exceptions. But we also prepare, because not preparing is cruel." Ethan stared at the blanket. The machine hummed. The IQ clock clicked in its plastic frame, a little too loud. "Okay," he whispered at last. But the okay was not consent, it was the sound people make when they are standing on a cliff and someone is explaining the wind. They placed the tunneled catheter that afternoon. Dr. Carter came to the bedside beforehand and explained the steps: local anesthesia, a small incision below the collarbone, The line tunneled under the skin to reduce infection risk, ultrasound guidance, X-ray to confirm placement. Ethan nodded through it, jaw set, staring at a spot in the middle distance where pain was hypothetical and so, for a moment, was everything else. He tolerated the procedure well. Dialysis, now in 4-hour sessions, left him wrung out, nausea prowling his stomach, a terrible thirst that couldn't be slaked because too much fluid would only be taken off later. He learned the small miseries, the dull ache in the arm that said nothing but managed to say it all, the fog that rolled in after treatments, the way time distorted when you watched it drip in plastic chambers. Between sessions, he slept. He woke to Margaret's voice, to Josh's guilty jokes, to Claire's efficient love. He woke to Dr. Carter's calm, to Leela's gentleness, to Dr. Singh's clear-eyed hope that never pretended to be certainty. And he woke, sometimes, to the raw fact of being 20 and suddenly old. The transplant coordinator arrived with a folder and a soft cardigan and the kind of competence that makes complicated things sound like recipes. Her name was Marisol. She shook hands with Ethan and Margaret, drew up a chair and took out a pen. "First, Ethan," she said, "we list your medical data in the transplant database and begin your evaluation. For a deceased donor, wait times depend on blood type, antibodies, region, and other factors. For a living donor, if there's a match, the timeline is shorter because we can schedule. Either way, we aim for health and safety above speed." She looked at Margaret. "For potential living donors, we start with blood type. Do you know yours?" "A positive," Margaret said. Marisol's eyes flicked to Ethan's chart. "Ethan is O positive." She nodded, already calculating contingencies. O can receive only from O. That means you and Ethan are not ABO compatible. The words should have felt like a door slamming. Instead, a new door opened beside it almost immediately. "But," Marisol continued, smiling at Margaret's flicker of pain, "ABO incompatible transplants can sometimes be done with special preparation. And there's also the paired exchange option, sometimes called a kidney swap. If you're healthy enough to donate, but not compatible with Ethan, we can match you with another pair in the same situation. You give to someone else, their donor gives to Ethan. For surgeries, one solution." Margaret had known she could love logistics. "You'll do that," she said, immediately, as if Marisol had offered her the most obvious errand in the world. "Test me." Marisol's smile didn't widen. Professionals like her knew not to celebrate early, but it warmed. "We will. The donor team is separate from Ethan's team to protect you. You'll meet a donor advocate. They work for you." Ethan's head lifted. "What if I say no?" Marisol turned to him with the gentleness of someone who has heard the question 100 times and knows it is new each time. "It has to be yes from both people," she said. "There's no transplant, no evaluation even started, unless you're comfortable. Today is information. That's all." He sank back. "Information," he repeated, and this time the word sounded like a life raft. After Marisol left, the room sat with the idea of a paired exchange like a strange guest at the table. Josh tried to joke something about kidney Tinder and then fell over his own apology. Margaret picked up the pen Marisol had left and twirled it as if pens could be talismans. "Mum," Ethan said finally, quiet and plain, "I don't want your anything. Not a kidney. Not a half kidney from a stranger because of your kidney. Not even the part where you think you have to fix this because you fix everything." Margaret took a breath and found that it arrived in her lungs already shaped like words. "I don't want to fix you," she said, and surprised them both. "I want you alive." He flinched. The truth always made more noise than the room allowed. "You said once I keep score," she went on, because once the door opened, her mouth knew the way through. "Maybe I do. I learned that from survival. But there's no ledger here, Ethan. There's only math. You need a kidney. I have to. We start there. He stared at her, then at the window, then at a point on the wall where paint had met drywall and lost. "You were sick last winter," he said, memory darting out like a fish. "Bronchitis. You fainted in the kitchen. The doctor said I should rest," she said. "I didn't. That's on me. The donor team will decide if I'm healthy enough. If I'm not, they'll stop me. If I am, then this is not about punishment or penance. It's about," she groped for a word that wasn't melodramatic and landed on the only one that didn't flinch. "It's about love." He closed his eyes. The dialysis machine clicked, a soft metronome. "I don't deserve it," he said. "Good," she said, not unkindly. "Then you won't feel you have to pay me back." His mouth twitched. For a moment, the air between them grew almost light, and then it settled again into the serious shape of the day. The evaluation began because that is what hospitals are for, turning terror into tasks. Blood draws. Vials labeled with barcodes that translated lives into stripes. Margaret sat in a different suite, away from Ethan, answering questions that felt like confessions. "Do you smoke?" "No." "Do you drink?" "Sometimes." "Not since the accident." "Any history of high blood pressure?" "Borderline." "During stress?" "Diabetes?" "No." "Heart disease in the family?" "Father had a me at 60. "Any kidney disease?" "No." They weighed her. They measured her blood pressure elevated, but not alarming. The nurse asked her to breathe and took it again. They explained the CT angiogram that would map her renal arteries, the GFR test that would quantify her kidneys margin. They drew her typing and explained cross-matching, as if it were matchmaking how antibodies recognized or rejected. The donor advocate, a woman with silver hair and eyes sharp as needles, asked questions the doctors did not. "Do you feel pressure to do this?" "I feel urgency," Margaret said. "Different word," the advocate replied. "Do you feel you can say no?" Margaret thought of Ethan at 3, cheeks red from the cold. Of Ethan at 15, sullen as winter. Of Ethan at 20, pale in a bed that hissed. "No," she said honestly. The advocate nodded, not with satisfaction, but with recognition. "We prefer donors who can say yes freely, which implies the power to say no. Think on that." "Well, keep talking." Margaret left those rooms lighter for having been questioned, heavier for the answers she couldn't alter. There was one more stop, cardiology. The treadmill test would not happen today, the EKG would. Electrodes like coins, paper printed with jagged proof that hearts tell on themselves. The tech smiled and said, "Look at that. Strong." And for a second Margaret wanted to put that word in her pocket. When she returned to Ethan's room, he was asleep, head tipped toward the window, lash dark smudges on his cheeks. Josh was dozing in the chair, chin on chest, hands folded in the posture of someone trying to convince security they belonged. Leela adjusted a drip and whispered, "Good numbers today." Margaret sat and let the chair receive her. She watched Ethan sleep and heard the future approach, like whether you could smell but not see. She did not know yet whether she would be approved, whether a paired exchange would materialize, whether Ethan's own stubborn kidneys would stage an 11th-hour demonstration of competence. She knew only what her body had learned: how to wait, how to move when the door opened, how to be still when it did not. Ethan stirred and blinked awake. For a moment he looked at her without context, and then she saw the snap of recognition, the relief he still tried not to show. "Hey," he said. "Hey," she answered. "How was your whatever they did to you?" "Boring," she said. "Which is exactly what you want from medicine unless it's kissing a wound." He huffed a laugh and winced. "Don't make me laugh." "I'll try," she said, and they both knew she wouldn't. Silence pulled, friendlier than before. He stared at the ceiling, then at her. "If they say you can't," he said, voice careful, "promise me you won't push it." "I'll listen," she said. It was not a promise to stop wanting. "And if they say you can," he added, the words dragging like nets. "I don't know how to let you." "You don't have to," she said. "Just don't stop me." He swallowed and looked away, and in that gesture she saw it, the boy. The man, the person in the middle, learning how to accept help without calling it surrender. That evening, Dr. Carter stood in the doorway with a chart tucked under his arm the way a pianist carries his music between rehearsals. "How are we holding up?" he asked the room. "Like a tent in wind," Margaret said. He smiled. "Good image. Well, keep tying the ropes." He glanced at Ethan. "Dialysis again tomorrow. Your chest x-ray looks clean. We'll get you walking in the hall if you're up to it. Nephrology will keep shepherding the transplant evaluation. No one is rushing you, but we're moving, because movement beats drift." Ethan nodded. "Thanks." After Carter left, Night took its seat by the window. The IQ softened its voice. Josh went home under Claire's supervision with a promise to sleep, which he broke by texting updates to a group chat that answered with a flood of heart emojis and crossed fingers. Margaret remained. She thought of kidneys too small, fist-sized anchors tucked against the back, noble in their anonymity until they failed. She thought of all the work they do without applause, filtering, balancing, deciding how much to keep and how much to let go. She thought of love doing the same. She folded her hands and made a deal with herself that wasn't a bargain, only a map. She would take each step the teams asked of her. She would hear every risk and sign consent anyway if consent was hers to give. She would let herself fear at 3 a.m. and choose at 3 p.m. when choosing was a muscle and not a scream. She would not dress this in martyrdom. She would call it by its name. Across from her, Ethan exhaled into sleep. The machine at his side clicked gently, counting out the hours. The decision was not hers to make alone. The body, the teams, the numbers, the pairing program, the stubborn, secret voices of the organs themselves, all of them would have votes. But inside her, something had already settled with the gravity of a planet sliding into orbit. If the road led there, she would go. Outside, night gathered its corners. Inside, the room made a small, determined light. Hospitals have their own way of bending time. The days did not march in sequence, they sagged and twisted, stretching into nights that hummed with monitors and whispered footsteps. Margaret had begun to live inside those warped hours. She knew the rhythm of Ethan's dialysis machine better than the beat of her own heart, the tempo of alarms more than the clock in her phone. But when the doctors began to say the word transplant with more certainty than recovery, something in her life that had been suspended in fog began to sharpen into unbearable focus. She could not sleep. Even when exhaustion dragged her eyes closed in the chair beside Ethan's bed, her mind replayed the same loop. Images of his pale face, the ivy lines, the weight of his hand in hers, and then, over it all, the voice of Dr. Singh. If his kidneys don't recover, we'll talk about long-term dialysis or transplant. Every night, the conversation replayed. Every night, Margaret answered the same way, "Take mine. Take me. I don't care if it breaks me. He will not die because I hesitated." Yet daylight brought doubts. Claire tried to reason with her. One afternoon she came armed with sandwiches and that particular brand of sisterly authority that never dulled with age. "You're not well yourself," Claire said, voice firm but not cruel. "You've had bronchitis twice this year. You fainted last winter. You've run yourself into the ground with work for 20 years. Do you honestly think surgery like this won't destroy you?" Margaret unwrapped the sandwich and stared at it, appetite gone. "If it keeps him alive, what does it matter?" Claire's eyes softened, but her jaw stayed hard. "It matters to me. It matters to Ethan. You can't save him by making yourself vanish." Margaret shook her head. "You don't understand. If I don't do this, if I let him waste away, I won't be able to live with myself. You think he'll live with himself if you die on an operating table?" Claire asked quietly. The words sliced deep. Margaret turned away, ashamed of the hot tears that blurred her vision. "This isn't penance, Mags," Claire went on gentler now. "You don't have to prove you love him by destroying yourself. He already knows." But did he? Margaret wasn't sure. Ethan's silence, his anger, his guilt, all of it tangled into a knot she couldn't untie. The only language she trusted was sacrifice. That night, alone in the IQ, she folded her hands and tried to pray. "God, what am I supposed to do?" She whispered into the sterile air. "If I step forward, I could die. If I step back, he could die. Where is the line?" No answer came. Only the steady sigh of the ventilator beside her, the hiss of oxygen through plastic. She looked at Ethan's face, calmer now, but still too pale, too fragile, and her chest ached with love so fierce it frightened her. "You're my boy," she murmured. "Even when you hated me. Even when I hated myself for not knowing how to love you right. You're my boy. If giving you a kidney is what it takes, then so be it." Her voice cracked. "Even if it kills me." The next morning, Dr. Carter found her by the window, staring out at the parking lot, as though the answer might be written on the windshields of strangers' cars. "You look like someone fighting 3 wars at once," he said quietly. She gave a humorless laugh. "That sounds about right." He stood beside her, arms folded. "I've seen parents in your place before. Some rush in, ready to offer everything. Some freeze in terror. Some vanish. You're here, and that already tells me more than you think." Margaret turned to him. "If it comes to me being the donor, am I strong enough?" "That's not for me to say yet," Carter replied. "The donor team will run every test, every scan. They won't approve you unless they're confident you can survive it. And if they say no, then you accept that it isn't your path. Loving someone doesn't always mean being the solution. Sometimes it means staying alive to walk with them through harder roads." She wanted to believe him, but belief was slippery. Later that day, Ethan was more awake than usual. His eyes followed her when she stood, when she sat, when she adjusted his blanket. Finally, he rasped, "You're thinking too loud." She startled, then gave a weak smile. "Am I? You get this look," he murmured, "like you're carrying bricks in your chest." Margaret sat, taking his hand. "What if I am?" "Then stop," he whispered, a trace of the old sharpness in his tone. "It's not your job to fix me like that." "It is my job," she said fiercely. "I carried you. I raised you. I'll save you." His eyes flashed. "Even if it kills you?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. Silence stretched, filled with the soft beep of the monitor. Ethan looked at her, something breaking in his gaze. "Then you don't get it. I'd rather die than watch you do that to yourself." The words struck her harder than she expected. She gripped his hand tighter, shaking her head. "I can't lose you. And I can't lose you," he shot back, though his voice cracked, weaker than his defiance wanted to be. For the first time in weeks, tears slid freely down his cheeks. Margaret leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his. They wept together, not as patient and caregiver, not as boy and stern mother, but simply as two people who loved each other so much it terrified them. That night, Margaret didn't pray. She sat in silence, listening to the machines, the footsteps in the hall, the faint hum of life being held together. The inner war hadn't ended, but something inside her had shifted. The choice was still hers to make, but now it wasn't fueled only by guilt and duty. It was fueled by love, raw, imperfect, undeniable. And love, she thought, was a burden worth carrying. The sun outside the hospital rose pale and uncertain, but inside the IQ the light never changed. Artificial daylight hummed above Ethan's bed, indifferent to ours, indifferent to the human heart breaking beneath it. Margaret had not left his side for weeks, and her body carried the weight of sleepless nights and coffee that no longer kept her steady. The doctors had been clear. Ethan's kidneys showed no signs of recovery. Dialysis would keep him alive, but it would not give him life. The word transplant now lived in every conversation, spoken gently, but with a growing finality that could not be softened. Margaret had been through the cycle of fear, through nights of bargaining prayers and days of trembling hope. She had argued with Claire, with Dr. Carter, with herself. She had stared at Ethan's sleeping face until the doubts in her chest screamed louder than her heartbeat. But on this morning, something inside her had settled. There was no more room for hesitation. She watched Ethan stir awake, his eyes sluggish, but clearer than they had been in weeks. He looked at her, his mouth twitching into the faintest smile, one corner of his lips turning upward, as if he wanted to prove he still could. "You look like you've made up your mind about something," he rasped, his voice roughened by weeks of illness. Margaret leaned forward, took his hand, and squeezed. "I have." Ethan's smile vanished. "Don't." "Ethan, no." His voice cracked, but the force behind it was pure, stubborn steel. "You're not doing it. I don't care what Dr. Singh or Carter say. I won't let you. You don't get to forbid me," Margaret said, her tone steady in a way that startled even her. "You're my son. I gave you life once. If it takes me giving part of mine again, then that's what it'll do." His eyes filled with tears that he tried and failed to blink away. "You think I can live with that? Watching you risk everything, your health, your life because of me. I'll hate myself forever." Margaret's throat tightened. She leaned closer, brushing her palm across his damp cheek. "Do you really think I haven't hated myself already? For every fight we had, for every time I was too tired to listen, for every day you thought I didn't love you enough." She drew a shaky breath. "This is not about guilt. This is about love, Ethan. And love doesn't count the cost." He turned away, staring at the window where pale morning light tried to squeeze past the blinds. "You'll die younger. They said it. Donors can get sick later. You could," his voice broke, the fear spilling into his words. "You could leave me. I can't lose you too." Margaret's own tears slipped free, but her voice held steady. "You're not losing me. You're keeping me. Every breath you take with my kidney inside you will be proof that I'm still with you. You'll never be without me." Ethan covered his face with his hands, shoulders trembling. "It's not fair." "No," Margaret agreed softly. "It isn't. But fairness doesn't save lives. Love does." When Dr. Carter arrived later that morning, Margaret was ready. She stood from her chair, straightened her aching back, and said without preamble, "Run every test you need. I'm his donor." Carter studied her face for a long moment. He didn't argue, he never wasted words on futile protests, but he also didn't soften the reality. "You know the risks." "I do," Margaret said. "You understand the process isn't simple. The evaluations, the surgery, the recovery, it's not just one sacrifice, it's many." "I understand." Carter nodded once, solemn. "Then we begin." Ethan groaned from the bed, dragging his hands down his face. "Why don't any of you listen to me?" I said no. "You don't get to decide for her," Carter said gently but firmly. "And she doesn't get to decide for you. That's why we do evaluations separately. Both of you have to agree in the end." "I don't agree," Ethan shot back. Margaret turned to him, her eyes fierce. "You don't have to agree today. You just have to live long enough to see tomorrow." The days that followed were filled with tests, scans, blood draws. Margaret endured them without complaint, even when the needles bruised her veins, even when the CT dye burned through her chest like fire. She sat through interviews with the donor advocate, answered questions about her health history, her motivations, her fears. Every time they asked why she was doing this, her answer was the same: "Because he's my son." Claire begged her to reconsider. "You'll shorten your life, Max. You'll wear yourself out." Margaret only shook her head. Better short and meaningful than long and empty. One night, Ethan found his voice again. He had been silent for hours, brooding, his hand limp in hers. But as the machines hummed in their steady chorus, he whispered, "You really mean it, don't you?" Margaret squeezed his hand gently. Every word. He turned his head, his tired eyes meeting hers. "Even if it kills you," she smiled through her tears. "Especially then. Because I'd rather die giving you life than live watching you fade away." Ethan sobbed quietly, his chest heaving, his lips forming words he couldn't say aloud. Margaret leaned over, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "This is my decision, my gift, and no one, not even you, can take it from me." And in that moment, though fear and pain filled the room, Margaret felt a strange, unshakable peace. For the first time since the accident, she knew exactly who she was and what she was meant to do. The decision was made. No matter how much Ethan protested, no matter how many times Claire wept into the phone, no matter how often Dr. Singh reminded her of the risks, Margaret had stepped onto this road, and she would not turn back. The hospital's evaluation process shifted into high gear. What had once been a trickle of blood draws and questionnaire became a flood. Cardiac stress tests, CT scans, psychological evaluations, surgical consultations. Margaret endured them all with the stubborn patience of a soldier carrying out orders. She learned more about her own body in 2 weeks than she had in the last 20 years. She knew her GFR score by heart, knew the precise branching of her renal arteries as mapped by the radiologist, knew how her blood type could be matched in a paired exchange program if direct donation failed. The language of medicine became her second tongue. Blood typing, creatinine clearance, crossmatch. Words that once sounded like riddles now felt like coordinates pointing toward her son's survival. Ethan, however, grew angrier with every step forward. "This is insane," he snapped one afternoon when Dr. Singh came to update them. His voice was stronger now, though still hoarse from weeks of illness. "You're really letting her do this? She's not even healthy. She fainted last year. She gets bronchitis every winter. How is this safe?" Singh's tone remained calm. "That's why we test thoroughly. If her body cannot handle it, she won't be cleared. Our priority is her safety too, Ethan." Ethan shook his head furiously. "You don't get it. She'll push herself even if it kills her." He turned to Margaret, his eyes blazing. "And you're supposed to be the parent. You're supposed to protect yourself, not throw yourself on a sword for me." Margaret's voice trembled but did not falter. "I am protecting myself. Do you think I could live if I let you waste away? Do you think I could breathe, knowing I stood by and watched?" He slammed his hand weakly against the blanket. "It's not your choice alone." "Yes, it is," she whispered, "because I'm the one who loves you enough to make it." The silence that followed was raw and suffocating. Ethan turned away, his shoulders shaking with silent fury and grief. Margaret reached for him, but he flinched. She let her hand fall back into her lap, her heart breaking all over again. Claire arrived that evening, armed with food and fierce words. "You're killing yourself," she said flatly as soon as they were alone in the hallway. "I'm saving him," Margaret answered. "At what cost?" Margaret looked at her sister, tears burning behind her eyes. "Every cost, if that's what it takes." Claire grabbed her hands. "And what if it doesn't save him? What if something goes wrong? Then I lose both of you. Do you think I can survive that?" Margaret swallowed hard. "This isn't about survival, Claire. It's about love." Claire's eyes filled with tears. "Then I hope love is enough to keep you alive." As the surgery date approached, the hospital's rhythm changed. Margaret met with the transplant surgeon, a woman named Dr. Alvarez, who explained the procedure in calm, clinical detail. "We'll remove one of your kidneys laparoscopically. Small incisions, cameras, instruments. Less invasive, quicker recovery. For Ethan, we'll implant the kidney in the lower abdomen, connect the blood vessels and ureter. He'll need immunosuppressants for life to prevent rejection." Margaret nodded, absorbing every word. The risks for you, Alvarez continued, include bleeding, infection, injury to nearby organs, blood clots, and long-term, a slightly increased risk of kidney disease. Most donors live long, healthy lives. But you must understand you are taking a risk. I understand, Margaret said. Her voice was steady, even as her hands trembled in her lap. Alvarez studied her. Why are you doing this? Margaret looked at her son through the glass of the IQ room, at his frail figure tethered to machines. Her throat tightened, but her answer was simple. Because I can. Ethan's resistance only grew fiercer. The night before Margaret's final clearance, he exploded. I won't let you do it, he cried, his voice cracking with desperation. I'll run away. I'll refuse the surgery. You'll die. Margaret interrupted, her voice sharp with grief. Is that what you want? To punish me with your death because you can't accept my love? His mouth opened, then closed. His face twisted with anger, but his eyes shone with tears. I don't deserve it. None of us deserve love, Margaret whispered, moving closer. She took his hand despite his resistance, held it tightly. That's why it's love. Not payment. Not fairness. Just love. His body sagged, the fight leaving him in a rush of sobs. Margaret pulled him close, rocking him as if he was still a child, as if her embrace alone could keep his broken body alive. The final tests cleared Margaret for donation, Dr. Alvarez confirmed it with professional gravity. You are a suitable donor. We can proceed. When Margaret heard the words, she felt a strange calm descend, like the hush after a storm. She looked at Ethan, who sat on the bed, pale and trembling, his lips pressed tight. She walked to him, took his face in her hands, and whispered, "It's settled. I'm giving you life again." He shook his head weakly, tears spilling over. And what if I lose you because of it? Margaret smiled through her own tears. Then you'll know I left this world loving you with everything I had. He broke then, sobbing into her arms. For the first time since the accident, mother and son clung to each other, not as combatants in an endless war of words, but as survivors of the same storm, holding on for dear life. The morning of the surgery arrived with a kind of silence that felt unnatural, as though even the hospital itself held its breath. The corridors were still filled with their usual shuffle of nurses and distant announcements, but for Margaret, the world had narrowed to the steady beat of her own heart and the knowledge that today she would walk into a room and let them cut her open for her son. She had signed the last of the consent forms the night before. Black ink, shaky handwriting. The words had seemed surreal on paper. Donor nephrectomy. Risks, mortality. She had paused at the line that asked whether she understood she could die, whether she accepted this without coercion. She had signed it anyway. Now she sat on a gurney in the pre-op area, dressed in a thin gown, her hair tucked under a blue cap. Claire sat beside her, hands clenched in her lap, looking smaller than Margaret had ever seen her. You don't have to prove anything, Claire whispered. Margaret smiled faintly. I am not proving. I'm loving. Claire shook her head, tears brimming. Sometimes I think love is just another word for madness. Then may I be mad, Margaret said. A nurse entered, brisk but kind. It's almost time, Doctor. Alvarez will be in shortly. Margaret nodded. How's Ethan? They've just started preparing him, the nurse said. He's asking for you. In the next bay, Ethan lay on his own gurney, pale but awake. IV lines threaded into his arms, monitors already tracking his heart and oxygen. When Margaret entered, his eyes flickered open, and for a moment he looked like a boy again, wide-eyed, terrified. Mum, he croaked. She took his hand, warm under the sterile sheets. I'm here. His eyes searched hers, desperate. Don't do this. Please. I can't. His voice broke. Margaret leaned down, kissed his forehead. You can. You will. And so will I. Tears slipped from the corners of his eyes. He turned his face into her palm like he had when he was 5. "I don't deserve you," he whispered. "You deserve life," she said. "And that's enough, Dr." Carter appeared then, scrub cap already on, his voice steady. "It's time." Margaret squeezed Ethan's hand once more before the nurses gently pulled her back. Their gurneys were wheeled down parallel hallways, mother and son separated by swinging doors, each rolling toward their own battle. The operating room was a cathedral of light, harsh, white, unrelenting. Margaret shivered as she was transferred to the table. The anesthesiologist leaned over her, eyes kind above the mask. "We'll take good care of you," he said softly. "You'll drift off soon." She glanced once at the ceiling, sterile and endless. She whispered a prayer not for herself, but for Ethan. "Let him live. Take what you need from me, but let him live." Then the world narrowed, blurred, and dissolved into black. Dr. Alvarez stood at the head of the table, her voice crisp. "Don't a nephrectomy, laparoscope. Let's begin." Incisions were marked. Instruments were guided through. Cameras projected Margaret's inner anatomy onto the monitors. The neat curves of her organs, the branching vessels, the kidney nestled like a secret against her spine. "Left kidney looks good," Alvarez said. "Clean vessels. Let's mobilize." Hands moved with practiced grace. The kidney was freed, its arteries and veins carefully clamped and divided, its ureter detached. Blood was suctioned, contained, measured. "Kidney out," Alvarez announced. She lifted the small, pink organ into a sterile basin. It pulsed faintly, as though unwilling to admit its exile. Nurses hurried it to the adjacent OR, where Ethan lay already prepped, unconscious under anesthesia. Dr. Carter was waiting. "Let's give this young man a future," he said. Ethan's abdomen had been opened with a careful incision in the lower right quadrant. His pale body lay surrounded by steel and light. Carter guided the donor kidney into place, cradling it as though it were made of glass. "Beautiful," he murmured. "Let's connect." The renal vein was sutured to Ethan's iliac vein, the artery to the iliac artery. Venae, meticulous stitches, sealed the bonds between mother and son, vessel to vessel, life to life. The ureter was joined to his bladder. Every motion was precise, deliberate, honed by years of practice and the gravity of this single moment. "Release the clamps," Carter said at last. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the kidney flushed pink as blood flowed in. A cheerless, quiet triumph filled the room. "Good perfusion," Carter confirmed, relief warming his voice. Minutes later, the first drops of urine trickled into the catheter bag. The room exhaled. A machine was being silenced, replaced by flesh and blood. Carter looked at the kidney, at the monitors, at the young man, breathing steadily beneath anesthesia. "Welcome back," he whispered. Hours passed before Margaret opened her eyes again in recovery. The world swam, her body heavy, her side burning with a deep ache. A nurse leaned over her. "You're okay," the nurse said softly. "The surgery went well, rest." Her lips parted. "Ethan, he's stable," the nurse assured her. "The kidney is functioning. He's still asleep, but it's working." Tears leaked from Margaret's eyes. Relief, exhaustion, and pain mingled into a single wave that left her trembling. She let herself drift again, comforted by the knowledge that part of her now lived inside her son, that her love had been carved into his very body. Later, in the IQ, Ethan stirred. His eyes fluttered open, blurry and slow. The first thing he felt was the ache in his abdomen. The second was the absence of the machine's relentless hum. He turned his head weakly and saw Margaret, pale and fragile, in her own bed beside his, IV lines hanging from her arm, her chest rising with shallow breaths. "Mum," he whispered, voice raw. Her eyes opened at once, finding him. Despite the pain, despite the weakness, her lips curved into a smile. "It's done," she whispered. "We made it." Ethan's throat tightened, tears sliding freely. For the first time since the accident, hope filled the room, not the fragile, desperate hope of machines, but the strong, enduring hope of flesh and blood. Mother and son lay side by side, broken but alive, bound together more deeply than ever before.